900 to 300 more. In 479 BC, the Persian king Xerxes marched to Greece. It was the second Persian invasion against Athens after the first had failed 10 years earlier, which began in retaliation for Athenian support in the Ionian resistance on the coast of Asia Minor. The first on his way to Athens was a Spartan defensive post at Thermopylae, a tricky hill pass system that had to be passed first. At the end of the Greek world, on the border with Thessaly, the last Spartan border post. No other Spartan border post is so far from Sparta. At the time an impenetrable defensive structure, the Spartans were considered invincible. The Persian army led by Xerxes was on its way to Athens. 100,000 Persians. While the Persian fleet sailed along the coast. Entering Greek territory, the Persian force was sighted. They were on their way. The Persian invasion began in 479 BC. When the Persian army invaded Greece via Thessaly, it first passed through Boeotia and Thebes and other polis on its way to Athens. There the local polis formed a military force to defend their homeland. But when the Greeks saw the Persian force, they retreated. The Greek force from Boeotia marched to receive the Persian army, but had to pretend that the Persian army could not be received. So the Greek army withdrew from Boeotia. The only ones left were the Spartans from the border post. 900 Spartan hoplites remained who were ordered to defend the border and to warmly welcome the Persian forces on Greek territory. The Persian army had to cross Thermopylae on the way to central Greece, solve a tricky labyrinth of serpentine lines and stumbling blocks to finally reach Boeotia. The hoplites chose a defensive position. You had the choice of a spiky gap in the mountains, but you chose a quiet river crossing. They waited there. When Leonidas, king of Sparta, heard this, he immediately set off for Thermopylae. He rushed to help with 300 brave Spartiates, because the Spartans leave no one behind. Leonidas was king of Sparta from the Aegeate family, one of the two royal families of ancient Sparta alongside the Eurypontids. They traced their roots back to the mythical Heracles-descended Eurysthenes, but were named after his son, Agis I. The Aegeates were considered the nobler sex and were, especially in classical times, more dominant in the political life of Sparta than the Eurypontids. Many important kings such as Cleomenes and Leonidas came from their ranks. Or the regent and general of Plataea Pausanias. When the Persian troops reached the defile, the Spartan hoplites blocked it and refused passage. Xerxes was the first to send the Medes and Kishans against the Spartans. After these remained unsuccessful after a battle that lasted a whole day, the immortals followed. According to Herodotus, the Greeks did not budge from their position for days and inflicted heavy losses on the Persians. On the second day, the barrage of the Persian archers increased significantly. On the third day, the Persian archers ran out of arrows. The fourth day was glorious. On the fifth day the king came. When the Persian troops achieved no significant success, Xerxes sent his elite troops, a collection of grotesque warriors from all corners of the world and other strange beasts. Leonidas took up the fight without hesitation. And if you didn't die, you're still fighting there today. The thermal passage in the heart of Greece is a bottleneck that plays a crucial role. Over 7,000 Greek soldiers gather here to face an epic battle. Soon they will face a force of more than 100,000 soldiers from the mighty Persian Empire, the largest army of their time. Led by 300 of the most feared warriors of antiquity, the Spartans, this day represents a kind of elite unit of antiquity. Your mission is to defend the pass or attack. For centuries the Spartans' courage, honor, and sacrifice were admired. None of them were allowed to leave the pass alive. The Battle of Thermopylae is one of the most famous battles in history, the epicenter of antiquity. Their influence extends far beyond the battle and would have a significant impact on the development of Western society and democracy. In this pass, 300 brave Spartans faced off against an overwhelming enemy force and forever entered the history books. The year is 480 BC, when King Xerxes, ruler of the mighty Persian Empire, reaches Greece. He leads the largest army to date, a modernly equipped force. The Persians could have easily sent 100,000 soldiers into battle at any time. It is believed that Xerxes mobilized over 100,000 soldiers for this invasion. Some sources even speak of 200,000 to 2 million Persian soldiers. To this day, historians argue about the exact strength of the Persian army. This was one of the largest armies ever to march through Greece, accompanied by a fleet of over 1,000 warships. The Persian Empire stretched from the banks of the Indus in India to the Nile in Egypt, and the size of this army was unimaginable. This army was incredibly expensive to maintain. Xerxes had spent 5 years training troops, building ships, and gathering supplies for his invasion of Greece. His goal was to burn Athens to the ground. You have to keep in mind the immense differences in size between the two enemies. On the one side was Greece with perhaps 500,000 or 600,000 inhabitants, a country without any significant influence on world affairs. On the other hand, there was the Persian Empire with millions of people from different peoples, the largest empire of its time. Some historians suggest that king democracy had just emerged, one of the cornerstones of Western civilization, and now it was in danger of falling victim to war. The invasion by King in August of 480 BC, the army reached a narrow pass, Thermopylae, the historic site where the Greeks built their defenses and where the 3-day battle would take place. At this time, the pass was about 180 meters wide at its widest point and was bordered to the south by the Kallidromo Mountains, which reached a height of about 1,400 meters. At the foot of the highest peak, cliffs plunged 90 meters into the depths. North of the pass, another cliff rose. Geographically, Thermopylae formed a natural bottleneck between the north and south of Greece, where the major cities were located. It was the only route from north to south, so it was clear to King Leonidas, his Spartans, and the other Greeks that they would plan their ambush there. A scout of Xerxes was sent into the pass to find out what awaited him on the way to Athens. The scout discovered more than 7,000 Greek soldiers blocking the eastern exit of the pass. The Greeks were outnumbered almost 15 to 1, but despite this they had positioned themselves to withstand the Persian attack. In a brilliant move, the Greeks had taken advantage of Thermopylae as a battlefield. Viewed from above, you could see a narrow pass that the Persian army had to cross. This was an advantage for the Greeks because a narrow area could be easily defended with just a few men. A pass reduced the strength of an army and made its size a disadvantage. If the entire army had to be forced through, few men who could act more flexibly could take them. The Greeks' fighting force was an absolute novelty, for the first time in their long history they fought not against each other, but side by side. At this time, Greece was not yet a closed nation, but consisted of many small city-states fighting for regional superiority. The largest of these city-states, Athens and Sparta, were bitter rivals, but at Thermopylae they put aside their differences to unite against the Persian enemy. The Greek alliance was led by King Leonidas, one of the 2 kings of Sparta. He was chosen by the allied Greeks of all the city-states to defend the pass at Thermopylae. He chose the soldiers and was their general. His job was to defend the pass to the death. The Battle of Thermopylae would make King Leonidas a legend, and every Greek has known his name ever since. A Persian advisor informs Xerxes of the resistance being put up by Leonidas and his 300 Spartans at Thermopylae. This conversation is mentioned in the histories of the ancient Greek historian Herodotus, one of the earliest accounts of the battle. "These men have come to fight with us for the pass," says the advisor. "If you dare to defeat these men and defeat the army that remains in Sparta, then, king, there is no people who can raise a hand against you." But Xerxes doesn't just rely on his army to confront Leonidas and his troops. The Persian fleet is waiting off the coast of Greece, in a narrow waterway at Cape Artemisia. She is supposed to sail into the rear of the Greek soldiers and attack them from the water. If the Persian fleet passed through the Strait of Artemisia, Xerxes' main force could attack the Greeks from the front while his landed troops surrounded them from the rear. In order to hold Thermopylae, the Greeks must hold off the ships and try to stop the Persian fleet. About 300 Greek warships defend the strait. On the Athenian flagship is the Greek commander Themistocles, a politician from Athens who has united land and sea forces to fight the Persians. The scene has been chosen, both opponents are ready, a fight will soon take place. Xerxes strikes the first blow from about 140 meters away. Thousands of Persian archers unleash a hail of arrows. Leonidas and his warriors have waited their whole lives for this moment. The Spartans are well prepared. Around 530 BC, 50 years before the Battle of Thermopylae, Leonidas was born and had to face the first challenge of his military career. After birth, he is examined by one of the elders, who decide whether the newborn is strong enough to live in this society. In an exclusively military society, one could not afford to be weak. If an infant showed any abnormalities, it was not allowed to continue living and was immediately abandoned. The parents' feelings played no role, all that mattered was the child's benefit to the state. Later there were only two ways to get a tombstone with your name, either you died as a man in battle or as a woman in childbirth, because that was how you gave your life for the state. One must imagine that giving birth and raising children was not for the parents or the family, but for the state. Vigorous infants like Leonidas were spared, while others were left to die. The Spartans believed that these children would not survive even the harsh training. This training was intended to turn ordinary boys into ruthless warriors. The Greek historian Herodotus writes that every Spartan boy was taken from his family at the age of 7 and put into a military training camp, including Leonidas. The life of a Spartan boy was very hard until his 7th year. Until then, he was mainly with his mother, while he only saw his father occasionally. Then he suddenly found himself in a state training system where he lived a hard military life with others. Here young Leonidas trained and learned how to fight and survive. If a boy was taken from his mother at the age of 7 and placed in the barracks, he would be separated there for the next 12 years. Once he entered the army, training focused on military skills, discipline, and toughness. The boys often didn't get enough to eat and were constantly hungry. They had to learn to share their food and hide their pain. But society as a whole was designed to suppress their individuality. Another bizarre ritual was used to ensure the boys' toughness. They were whipped in groups until they bled. The one who still stood upright received a special honor. The family stood by and shouted to their children not to faint. There is evidence that training became more brutal as people grew older, probably in preparation for the cruelty of battle. In some ways, the Spartans were like a misguided brotherhood where hazing led to discipline. The older the boys got, the harder the training became. Also in his early teens, Leonidas and the others began training with wooden swords and blunt swords. And yet these war games could have a fatal outcome. Many young people died in these fights, which was also part of the preparation. One of the last tests for the young Spartans was also one of the most brutal. Leonidas had to sneak out of the barracks at night and kill a slave, a so-called red one. For centuries it has been tradition for a young Spartan to become a man. However, the point of this ritual was not in the person himself, but in learning the art of camouflage and being a good soldier who remains undetected. When Leonidas turns 18, his training is complete. He has survived the Spartan training that weeds out the weak, and he has learned to kill or be killed. He is accepted into the army with the other soldiers. For the Spartan parents, this was one of the proudest moments of their lives as they witnessed their son's transformation from child to man. This was especially true for the mothers, whose sacrifices for the state had now become valid. They sent their children away at the age of 7 to be trained as soldiers, and now at the age of 18 they are in battle. A telling story is that of a Spartan mother who saw her son off to war and gave him the shield with the words, "With this shield come back victorious," or carried on it as a corpse. Either you win the battle or you die. Spartan mothers had a very strange way of showing their love. In the Spartan war cult, women were also known for their physical strength. Sometimes a Spartan would try to take a wife by force, but if she didn't like him and she was strong enough, she would simply strike him down. However, if the Spartan was a worthy and attractive warrior, he quickly found a wife. But the Spartans didn't have a typical family life. They were at home on the battlefield. The Spartans had the first professional army of the Greek city-states. Every summer there was war, and the city-states went to battle against their neighbors. As soon as summer came, many brutal battles broke out. It appears that these regional conflicts were preparation for the ultimate battle that was already on the horizon, the battle against the Persians. In 481 BC, a year before the Battle of Thermopylae, a Greek spy finds out that King Xerxes is moving his army. Today it is assumed that this force must have been 100,000 strong. For the Greeks, this meant that the whole world wanted to devour them. King Xerxes wanted to burn the Greek city-states. When the 6S plan and the huge army become known, the Greeks quickly realize that they need help. They send a general to call on the allies to defend Greece, but no one responds. At this time, Greece was made up of various city-states that often fought against each other rather than with each other. Despite their poor relations, the Athenians asked for help from their worst rivals, the Spartans and their king Leonidas. Leonidas is now an experienced soldier. Like all Spartans, he spent his entire childhood becoming a fearless warrior. The Athenians who face him are aware of this. Leonidas is a skilled warrior, but fate decides before the Athenians' request can be made. Before they can decide whether they need to help them, the Spartans consult an oracle. The Spartans were very religious, and consulting an oracle was one of the most common methods of learning the will of the gods. They turned to the oracle at Delphi, one of the holiest Greek cities. In a temple above a fissure in the earth, the oracle entered a trance-like state. Leonidas believes that the gods chose him to save later. He tells the Sparta Council of Elders that he will support the Athenians in the fight against the Persians. Leonidas' decision seems to be influenced by myth, but there could be another reason. Furthermore, he decided to go into battle regardless of whether Xerxes really wanted to occupy Greece or not. It was a monumental challenge for King Leonidas, who would fight against the greatest military power in the world. However, the Council of Sparta is still not convinced and only gives Leonidas a small army, consisting of just 300 men. Leonidas selects his best warriors, but only those who have a son who can secure the future of Sparta are to die with the soldiers. It is clear that this is a suicide mission, but it offers a great opportunity for a massive battle that leaves plenty of room for Sparta and for Leonidas himself. The mighty Persian Empire has dominated the Eastern world for almost a century. About 70 years before the Battle of Thermopylae, King Cyrus II united all the tribes of what is now Iran. With an army from the mountains consisting of light and heavy infantry as well as cavalry, Cyrus recognized the importance of cavalry. The tradition of cavalry in the Persian army began with enlisted horsemen. On the battlefield, a Persian army usually consisted of 80% infantry and 20% cavalry. This combination made the Persians unbeatable on the vast plains of Asia. Within 20 years, Cyrus II conquered 4 major kingdoms in Asia. His empire now stretched from India to Egypt. The Persian Empire was the largest and wealthiest empire in the long history of the Middle East. Cyrus divided his empire into provinces, called satrapies, and allowed the defeated peoples self-government and religious freedom. Instead of forcing their own beliefs on the conquered peoples, they were able to maintain their lifestyle. Cyrus' warm-hearted behavior was almost unprecedented in antiquity, but may have inadvertently led to the battle with. In 546 BC, Cyrus conquered the Greek colonies in the province of Ionia in what is now Turkey. When the Greek colonies revolted, the Persians initially supported the local government. But when the rebels received help from outside, the Persians found themselves in trouble. The Athenians, supported by troops from Athens, joined the rebels and burned the city of Sardis, the capital of Media. This Ionian revolt was a crucial event in the history of relations between the Persians and the Greeks and led to the events of the next 80 years and to open conflict. Athens had awakened a sleeping giant. King Darius vowed revenge when one of his slaves had to tell him before every meal, "Remember Athena." Soon blood would drink the Greek soil. In 490 BC, 10 years before the Battle of Thermopylae, the Persian king Darius sent an army of 26,000 men across the Aegean Sea to destroy Athens. The reason for this invasion was anger at the support Athens had given the Greek rebels in the Ionian Revolt a few years earlier. This was followed by one of the most famous battles in Greek history, the Battle of Marathon. About 42 kilometers east of Athens, on the plain of Marathon, 10,000 Greek soldiers opposed the invaders and took up early positions on the beach to observe the Persian fleet. Despite the distance from Athens, the Persians struck. 26,000 Persian soldiers landed on the beach and attacked the Greeks, who had formed a defensive line in a narrow valley between two mountains. The large Persian army clashed with the Greek defenders, who initially stood firm, but soon their defenses began to crumble. The Persians advanced, but it was a trap. Only the center of the Greek line retreated, while the flanks held their positions. As the Persians advanced into the valley, they were surrounded by the Greeks. They could no longer maneuver in the cramped conditions. The Greeks drove the scattered Persian soldiers back to the beach, fought them, and even cut off some of their hands as they clung to their ships. A runner was sent to Athens to declare victory. He ran about 42 kilometers, which is the origin of today's marathon. When the runner arrived in Athens, he shouted Nike, which means victory, means. The Athenians built the original Parthenon as a symbol of their triumph over the Persians. The loss in the Battle of Marathon and the symbolic building shocked the Persian Empire. Of course, such a large empire and such a great king could not tolerate such an insult to their national prestige. The Persians' first attempt at revenge was a failure. Darius planned another attack, but died before he could carry it out. Interestingly, ancient monarchs, whether in Egypt, Syria, or Persia, educated their sons not only in philosophy, mathematics, and strategy, but also in the art of survival. They sent them to school, where they learned how to get out of life-threatening situations. An example of this was the stage where a young warrior was locked in a courtyard and had to fight a lion to kill it or face it. The origins and training of these princes were intended to prepare them to rule over the largest and most powerful empire in the world. When they finally became kings, they often had only one thought on their minds: revenge. One such king was Xerxes, who planned his attack on Athens 10 years in advance. Xerxes was not an uneducated ruler. He was raised from childhood to be a warrior and ruler. His plan was to walk on water. He wanted to take his army of 100,000 soldiers to cross the Hellespont, a 1.5-kilometer wide strait south of the Black Sea. The overland route would have been much longer, and the subjugation of all the peoples along the way would have taken years. To transport his massive force across water, Xerxes ordered the construction of a 15-kilometer-long pontoon bridge made of ancient barges. Xerxes' engineers lined up nearly 700 ships side by side and anchored them to the seabed. They were then tied together with 2 different pillars made of flax and papyrus and secured with dozens of ropes, each weighing almost 2 tons. The ships were provided with wooden planks to create a flat surface for the march of people and animals. This remarkable achievement undoubtedly impressed Xerxes' contemporaries. It showed not only that the Persian Empire had a large army, but also a huge technological advantage. The Persian army crosses the bridge commanded by Xerxes and reaches northern Greece almost 3 months later. Thanks to a spy in the Persian ranks, the allied Greeks were already able to build 2 defensive lines. The first is in the south at the Isthmus of Corinth, which is intended to protect the city-states in the Peloponnese, including Sparta. The second line is the raiding party to the north, at Thermopylae Pass, led by King Leonidas. Here 300 Spartans and 7,000 soldiers from other Greek city-states are waiting for the Persian army. Offshore, Themistocles commands the combined Greek naval forces and prepares to confront the Persian fleet in the strait near Cape Artemision. The battle is imminent. On a cliff overlooking the Thermopylae Pass, Persian King Xerxes prepares to send his army into battle. He marched around the Aegean Sea with 100,000 men and over 1,000 warships to destroy the Greek city-state. Sparta's King Leonidas is waiting at the Thermopylae Pass with more than 7,000 Greek soldiers. They block the eastern exit of the pass and defend the route to Athens. The choice of this location is a strategic masterstroke, as the Persians' numerical superiority is useless here. In a narrow pass, a small contingent of soldiers can hold back a large army, as the Swiss would later demonstrate. Before the battle, Xerxes attempted to use diplomacy by sending a message advising the Greeks to lay down their arms. However, Leonidas replied in his typically Spartan way, "Come and get them." This marked the beginning of one of the most famous battles in history. The Spartans, known as the finest soldiers in Greece, fought in a distinctive formation known as a phalanx. They stood 8 men wide and 4 deep, shoulder to shoulder, forming a solid wall of bronze, wood, and muscle. It was a defensive line that glittered in the sunlight and presented the Persians with an unprick. The Spartan shields were massive constructions, covered in bronze and about 90 centimeters in diameter, which weighed up to 9 kilograms. These shields were developed around the 6th century BC and revolutionized warfare. Earlier shields only had a handle in the middle through which the soldier would put his forearm and hold the shield by the edge, while the middle was supported by the arm. With this new type of shield, soldiers had much more freedom of movement. The Spartans were known for custom painting their shields. Leonidas is said to have painted a life-sized fly on his shield to intimidate the enemy. Keeping his promise to black out the sun, Xerxes commanded nearly 5,000 archers from across his empire. These archers probably used bows made of date palm wood, an inexpensive material with little shooting power. The arrows raining from the sky had little effect against the Spartans' heavy armor. In addition to shields, Corinthian helmets protected the Spartans' heads from Persian arrows. These helmets were made from a single piece of bronze and provided maximum head protection, but were also very heavy and hindered the soldiers' vision and hearing. Most Spartans also wore lamellar armor made of strips of heavy leather and thin bronze. This armor was almost impenetrable and could repel arrow attacks. After the arrow attack, almost 10,000 Persian infantrymen rushed towards the Greeks, but they stood firm and went on the offensive themselves. The masses clashed with great force, but the Greeks held firm and were able to stop the enemy attack. From the phalanx, the first 2 ranks attacked with a coordinated push attack. The Spartans' primary weapon was a 2 to 3 meter long spear, the dory. It was about 5 centimeters in diameter, weighed between 1 and 2 kilograms, and had a pointed iron tip at the other end for better balance, which could also be used as a weapon. In the first clash, about 1,000 men were probably hit by the Spartans, with most of the stab wounds being fatal. The Spartans' secondary weapon was the xiphos, a 60 to 90 centimeters long double-edged sword for striking and stabbing, but was only used when the phalanx was broken or the Spartans had lost their spears. The fighting continued all day, but it was not a continuous battle. The Persians, lightly armed and barely armored, were unable to penetrate the narrow pass as effectively. They also could not use their cavalry, as the narrow pass made this impossible. The Greeks cleverly used their defensive positions and made a flank attack by the Persians impossible. The Spartans stood shoulder to shoulder like an immovable boulder and simply repelled the waves of Persian attacks. It soon became clear to the Persians that this tactic was not successful. The Spartans were so well trained that they inflicted heavy losses on the Persians. The Spartans and their allies had achieved exactly what they wanted. They stopped the largest attack on Greece to date. Nevertheless, the Persians attempted to reach the rear of the Greeks' defenses by sea. The sea battle was bloody and posed another challenge for the Greeks. One might wonder why Xerxes did not attack the Spartans from behind by sea. After all, he had over 1,000 warships at his disposal. The reason for this is the ancient fleet located at Cape Mission. The Persian ships are on the other side of the strait at Cappatia. The Persians want to break through the Greek lines, past the Strait of Attica, and then drop troops behind the Greeks to surround them. The man responsible for stopping the Persian fleet is on the Athenian flagship. Many consider him to be the genius behind the land and naval defensive operations against the Persians, and he is considered one of the finest military tacticians of the ancient world. This Athenian, called Astocles, was truly the man who made the battle possible. He was, so to speak, the Winston Churchill of his time, a respected statesman in Athens who was able to assess the impending conflict well with his strategic skills. He was of immense value to the Greeks. The Persian fleet attempts to circumvent the Greek ships by sending 200 of their 1,000-plus ships southeast around the island. Demistocles tries to surprise the Persian commander with a brave and daring move. Late in the afternoon, the Greek fleet leaves its position and provokes the Persian fleet, which is more than 3 times larger. The Persian commander did not expect this. The Astocles is attacking, and the time is also unusual. It is late afternoon and he attacks because he knows that it will soon be dark and the fight cannot last long. You can't fight a battle at night, so the Astocles tries to keep its potential losses low. The Persian commander orders his remaining 800 ships into the crowd. Despite the numerical inferiority, the Astocles tries to sink as many enemy ships as possible. The Greeks are fighting against overwhelming numbers, but they have the advantage that Astocles is a master of tactics. He was born the son of a trader, but in Athens, where democracy is being born, he is able to break free from these social shackles. Because of its natural harbor, a tradition of seafaring developed in Athens, and Athens became an important commercial and military power in the Aegean. Many Athenians, including the Astocles, are excellent sailors who can navigate the ships along the treacherous coasts of Greece. The masterful nautical training shapes the Astocles' skills. Undoubtedly his future was shaped, but his most important lesson was learned at the Council of Athens. There, growing up in a developing democracy, Demistocles learned the art of manipulation and political strategy. He used intelligence and cunning to secure a place in government. These qualities eventually allowed him to build the fleet Athens needed against the Persians. Around 490 BC and 200 BC, 10 years before the Battle of Thermopylae, Athens only had about 100 warships. Demistocles knew that this was only a fraction of what the Persians could muster, having seen the Persian force up close at the Marathon. As a general at the Battle of Marathon, he gained experience in classical tactics, but he learned something different from the battle than the other Greek generals. Demistocles concluded from the Battle of Marathon that ground forces could only be successful if they received support from the sea. He knew that after the ignominious defeat at Marathon, the Persians would return to finish their work. He believed that this time the Persians would attack from both land and sea. Demistocles recognized the need for synergy between land and naval forces. The fleet could only support the ground forces as long as the coasts were secured, and securing the coasts was the troops' job. He knew that the Persians could not maintain an army on the Greek mainland if they had no supplies from the sea. Therefore, he concluded that the future of Athens did not depend on increased army strength, but instead on an increase in the size of the fleet. The problem Demistocles faced was that no one wanted to believe him. Both the generals and the people of Athens had great confidence in their army and did not believe that the Persians would return. But Demistocles lived with the constant thought that they had to deal with this now and pursued some strategies that probably saved the Greek world. First, he had to convince Athens to invest in expanding the fleet, and he had to find the necessary funds. In 483 BC, in 300 BC, 3 years before the battle, he was lucky. A new vein of silver was discovered in Laurion, a district of Athens. After a year, almost 2.5 tons of the precious metal had been mined. Demistocles wanted this money to be spent on his fleet. The challenge was to convince the Athenians that they did not need reserves of silver in the treasury, but rather warships in the harbor. Each Athenian was entitled to 10 drachmas, which would be equivalent to about $1,500 or $1,600 today. With a lot of money, especially because many Athenians did not believe in a second Persian invasion, Demistocles used all his political cunning and convinced them. He told them that competition with Athens from the island of Regina posed a threat to Athens' merchant ships. Finally convinced, the Athenians allowed Demistocles to invest in the fleet. So it was a lie that saved Greek civilization. What historians would call a lie or untruth was, for a politician, a clever deception of the population in order to achieve a higher goal. That's exactly what he did. He knew that telling the truth would achieve nothing with the people. His cunning brought the desired success. At this time, Athens' fleet consisted of triremes. A trireme is about 30 meters long and over 5 meters wide. It is largely made of pine wood, which is widespread in the Mediterranean region. Perhaps the best way to compare a trireme is with a racing boat. She was a very light ship that was primarily used for rowing. The lighter you built it, the faster the ship was. The hull of the trireme is open at the top, and the deck consists of 1 or 2 longitudinal planks on which the captain and about 4 soldiers stand. Although it has a small sail, the trireme is powered primarily by 170 to 220 rowers sitting on 3 levels, one above the other. At the bow of the trireme is a ram, made of hard cedar wood and inlaid with bronze or copper, for striking other ships with. The top speed of a replica trireme is 15 knots, which is fast enough to operate effectively. When the Persians reached the Strait of Artemision and Thermopylae a year later, the Greeks had expanded their fleet by more than 100 ships. And yet the Persian fleet far outnumbers the Greek one. Demistocles must find out whether his efforts to expand the Athens fleet were worth it. With a signal, Demistocles gives the signal for the Greek ships to fall back to a narrower place and form a circle. At the second signal, the fleet breaks formation and attacks the Persians. In ancient sea battles, people did not fight each other directly, and there were no grappling hooks. The aim was to maneuver the ships in such a way that they could ram and sink the enemy's ships. The method was to come from the side at a certain angle and destroy the hull. The ship's propulsion was not the sails, but the oars. The attacking ship pulled in its own oars and, as it passed, smashed the oars of the other ship, which then lay in the water unable to maneuver. What really mattered in these battles was not so much the weight or size of the ships, but rather the speed. In the cramped conditions of Thermopylae, the smaller Greek fleet was able to damage some Persian ships. They captured 30 more enemy ships and take many prisoners. We cannot say exactly why the Greeks were so successful on the first day after the attack. Both the Greeks and Persians had triremes, and there may not have been any significant advantage in speed. Whatever the reason, it was a major psychological victory for the Greek fleet. Since Demistocles attacked late in the day, the battle did not last long, allowing him to minimize his losses. The sudden storm must have taken everyone completely by surprise. The Persians certainly didn't expect to lose to the smaller Greek fleet, and the Greeks didn't expect to do so well. Demistocles won this sea battle, and Leonidas won the land battle. On the first day of the battle, the Persians were defeated by the Greek fleet, and Demistocles defeated nearly 10,000 infantry on land. After the first day of battle, the Greeks had given the Persians a lot of trouble. That night they treated their wounds and thought about what to do next. As night falls, a huge storm breaks out and the Persian soldiers are plagued by wind and rain. A very uncomfortable night for the Persians, who probably didn't get a very restful sleep, but they would have needed it for the next day. The storm also hits the part of the Persian fleet that was supposed to sail around the island, and all 200 ships sink. The Persians cannot ignore this omen because the battle is not yet decided. On the second day of the battle, the Athenians and Spartans take up their defensive positions. Demistocles is in the Strait of Artemisium, and Leonidas and his 300 Spartans are at the Thermopylae Pass. Both prepare for the Second Persian attack. As the sun rises on the second day, Xerxes says to himself, "Enough with the games," and sends his heavy infantry, the Immortals. They choose the pride of their army and were convinced that the Immortals would break the resistance immediately. 10,000 men march straight towards them in a rectangular formation and in absolute silence, unstoppable. They don't wear helmets, but so-called animal heads that are covered with a thin, transparent material. These 10,000 men were called the Immortals because every one of their fallen was immediately replaced. Both armies face each other in the Thermopylae Pass about 50 meters apart. The Persians are faceless and silent, but silence is not part of the Spartans' psychological strategy. Finally, the Persians attack. The Immortals silently push against the Greek line, but like the day before, the 300 Spartans and the other Greeks do not retreat. The Immortals' weapons cannot penetrate Greek armor, but the Greek scouts find their targets easily. The Immortals wear thin scale armor beneath their tunics, but the metal scales are no thicker than playing cards and are ineffective against the power and precision of Spartan spears. The Persian shields are made only of wickerwork, well protected against light blows or arrows, but compared to the Greek shields made of wood and bronze or copper, it is not surprising that the heaviness of the Greek infantry can easily penetrate the coarse shields. Man for man, company for company, no one could keep up with the Spartans in hand-to-hand combat. The Persians had never fought against such a haughty army, as well-trained, equipped, and tactically flexible as that of the Spartans. After 2 days, thousands had already fallen and the infantry lines were littered with the dead. After each attack there are more dead, and those bodies get in the way, so during breaks in fighting men move the dead out of the way. At the end of the second day, the Persians had suffered enormous losses and still had no means against the Greeks. Practically speaking, Leonidas was in a pretty good position after the first 2 days of fighting, as he repelled every attack. Meanwhile, Demistocles leads the Athenian fleet into the second day of the sea battle. The previous night's violent storm destroyed the Persian ships that attempted to circumnavigate the Greeks. Without Persian ships behind him, Demistocles can concentrate his fighting power forward, but is still vastly outnumbered. There are no exact reports of the battle, but what is certain is that the Greek triremes once again destroyed many of the Persian warships. At the end of the second day, the familiar picture emerges. The Persians have once again tried in vain to defeat the Greek front, which is still holding firm. It will be another psychological victory for the Greeks as frustration grows and festers in the Persian ranks. The Persian light and heavy infantry have failed and the situation is becoming delicate. The answer lies in finding a way around the Spartans' position, and that is exactly Xerxes' plan. From the Persian camp a narrow path leads around the mountains, directly behind the Greek lines. Historians disagree about when Xerxes discovered this path. Some suspect that a Greek spy informed about this at the end of the second day. Unable to break through the Greek defenses and his supplies running low, he decides to use the path. On the night of the second day, after the heavy infantry attack in the center had failed, under cover of darkness he began sending 10,000 men across this pass to flank the Spartan position. But Leonidas also knew about this pass. Before the first day of the battle he had stationed 1,000 warriors at the highest point of the pass. When the Persians approached the position of the actual soldiers, they are no longer there. For some reason, the fresh troops believed the attack would be on their homeland, so they retreated there to defend their families. This means that the Persians finally have free rein. The Persians could have stormed down the hill at any time during the night. In the middle of the night, Greek scouts report to Leonidas that the allies are retreating. Knowing that he is now surrounded, he orders the Greek infantry to withdraw. It's not easy to just turn around and give away thousands of soldiers. The enemy would immediately understand what you were doing and attack the front. You can't wait until the back line stands again. You have to withdraw relatively small units one at a time in the hope that the enemies don't notice the gap. By dusk, all Greek troops have withdrawn, all except Leonidas and the 300 Spartans and about 1,000 soldiers from Test. This aspect of the battle is largely unknown, but approximately 1,000 soldiers from the city-state of Test remained with Leonidas. They could have left, but they chose to stay with the Spartans until the end. This has been forgotten because the Battle of Thermopylae has become increasingly mythological in history and in today's films, with 300 Spartans taking on millions of Persians. However, it wasn't like that. Yet this army of just over 1,000 soldiers is surrounded by tens of thousands of Persians as Leonidas and his men prepare for their final battle, for that one moment when the Spartans went to the front to die and the allies went back to die life. For me, this is the most emotional moment of the entire battle. The question is, why did Leonidas do this? Why didn't he withdraw with his troops too? There are several answers to this. Some say he was fulfilling the oracle's prophecy that the glorious city would be taken by the sons of Persia. Or perhaps he mourned the loss of his king and felt obliged to die for his work. He believed that he was saving with his sacrifice, and that's why he stayed and heroically threw himself into battle. He knows he will sacrifice himself, but he doesn't want to become a martyr. It's not about the fact that as a Spartan he was raised to be steadfast until death. On the contrary, he has learned to sneak, steal, and go into hiding. But as a Spartan, he believed in the oracle and considered it his duty to die for the state. Leonidas may have remained at the Cool Pass because of his faith, but from a military perspective he provided cover for a tactical retreat. Every day that he can hold off the Persians gives the Greeks behind him an opportunity to regroup and build new defensive positions. The main reason he decided to fight to the last man was to buy time. In short, he is covering the strategic withdrawal of his soldiers. It will forever remain a mystery why exactly Leonidas decides to stay behind. The final battle of these 300 men will never be forgotten. Leonidas was able to hold off the Persian advance for 2 days, but now he was trapped. They ultimately figured out how to stab him in the back. Despite this knowledge, the Spartans diligently prepare for battle. A Persian scout observes them doing physical exercises naked and then wishing for their hair. The Persians cannot understand this. They see it as just vanity or an over-the-top morning toilette. Little did they know that Spartans prepare their bodies for death. Cleansed and ready for battle, the Spartans enter the battlefield for the last time. They were professional warriors. They defined themselves through fighting, and this defined their status in society. I would say that they welcomed the fight with open arms, like General Custer did. They probably sought the fight for psychological and social reasons. Mr. Ott also reports on the last battle. On one side the barbarians under Xerxes marched forward, on the other the Greeks under Leonidas. Knowing that they would soon leave the scene and die, they pushed further than ever before, to the wider parts of the pass, where they knew they would face death in the form of those who bypassed the mountain. They showed the barbarians all the strength they had and fought only for the moment. It is impossible to say exactly what happened during the battle, but I suspect that after the enemy attacked from the front and rear at the same time, the Greeks had to abandon their defense. We can only assume that when the foundation of the Greek defense was shattered, the Spartans lost their strength and the order of battle descended into chaos. Everyone fought for themselves in hand-to-hand combat. Some have probably lost their swords. It is reported that the Greeks' ranks were broken and they fought with everything they could find. The bravery and courage of some Spartans are also mentioned, including Leonidas, who is said to have distinguished himself in battle. Despite their brave conditions and years of harsh training, it was only a matter of time before the Spartans would fall. The oracle's prophecy would soon actually come true. It is reported that Leonidas is hit by Persian arrows quite early in the battle. One can easily imagine the great king dying and watching his soldiers fall one by one. Many honored Leonidas for this fight, and it showed that he was a great warrior like the heroes of old. A fierce fight took place over his body. For times the Greeks repelled the enemy and saved his body with their bravery. Those who were able to recover the king's body took it with the few remaining Spartans to a narrower part of the pass. The Persians lined up their archers for the last time and found their targets with ease. Every Spartan was killed. After the battle, Xerxes enters the battlefield. He lost almost 20,000 men in 3 days. He orders the fallen Persians to be buried so as not to demoralize the rest of the army with the sight of them. He also orders Leonidas' head to be cut off and attached to a pole. But there is something good that can come from such a catastrophe. These heroic men gave their lives to ensure a safe retreat for their comrades. They bought them time and held the canyon as long as they could. Their story has been passed down from generation to generation and is still remembered today. Xerxes now has free choice. The Greek city-state of Athens is doomed. He marches his army through the Thermopylae Pass and chases the Greek troops before him. Some of the Greek city-states that were allied with him defect. Mistoclass still has the Persian fleet off the coast of Beetmission, but this time it suffers significant losses. However, after the collapse of the Greek defense on land, Team Douglas no longer has any reason to defend the strait. He leads the rest of his fleet south to regroup and begin a new battle. Knowing that the destruction of Athens cannot be averted, the Athenians seek advice from the oracle at Delphi. "Why are you sitting here, awaiting destruction, in the most distant places on earth?" is the oracle's cryptic answer. It gives them the advice of a wooden wall, the only thing that cannot be destroyed. Many Athenians interpret this differently. Some believe that it refers to the walls of the Acropolis, while others think that it is the ships of the fleet that are supposed to evacuate the city. 2 months after the Battle of Thermopylae, Xerxes fulfills a promise and takes revenge for the burning of the Iranian capital of Sardis and the defeat at Marathon. It took 20 years and claimed tens of thousands of lives, but finally he burns Athens to the ground. The population is saved, except those who refuse to abandon their god and their temple on the Acropolis. A few remain behind. Xerxes destroys the Acropolis and the temples of Athena. This is his revenge. A month after the destruction of Athens, the Greeks take their revenge. Themistocles lures the Persian king to the Strait of Salamis, where many Athenians have fled and a restored fleet awaits. The details are disputed, but apparently a Greek double agent gave the Persians false information about the Greeks' location. The Persians are suddenly attacked by the Greek fleet and most of the Persian ships are destroyed. The Battle of Salamis is arguably the most important strategic moment of the Persian Wars. Xerxes leaves Greece and never returns. Many historians suspect that this was the beginning of the end of the Persian Empire. The Greeks are now bolder and are making various attacks on their own soil. They won great victories against the Persians at Platai and Mycale. They drive the Persians back to Asia and destroy the pontoon bridge that still crosses the Hellespont. They remove the ropes made of flax and papyrus that tied the ships and keep them as trophies. The various Greek city-states are able to put aside their differences and finally unite to fight Persia together. A strategy first used at Thermopylae. The importance of this battle is sometimes underestimated, not only from a military perspective, but also from a symbolic and cultural standpoint. Greece is becoming something it wasn't before. It is no longer a collection of small city-states, but becomes a nation. Finally, Philip II of Macedon finally unites the Greek city-states into one nation. The Persian Empire was eventually crushed by his son, Alexander the Great. Greek culture, politics, laws, literature, philosophy, and art conquered the world. Greek culture spread and became the basis of Western civilization. This would have been completely impossible if Greece had continued to consist only of various city-states. But it became a nation. This national feeling had its origins at the Thermopylae Pass. It was the final battle for Leonidas and the 300 Spartan soldiers who stayed behind and fought to the death so that their Greek brothers could continue the fight. Wars are won by depriving the enemy of the will to continue fighting. At Thermopylae, Leonidas and the Spartans began to break the will of the Persians. 150 years later, the memory of the 300 fallen Spartans was intended to confirm the victory over Persia. Because if the Persians had won, democracy would have been nipped in the bud. It is difficult to imagine that democracy would have developed elsewhere in the Middle East or the Greek world. It would have been her end. For centuries, military theorists have analyzed the final battle of the 300 Spartans, in which they faced superior enemy forces and sacrificed their lives for their comrades. The heroism and bravery of the Spartans are still admired. But perhaps more important is what this battle meant for Western civilization.
the ground!